Welcome to the Diverse Minds podcast, where we give you the tips, tools, and techniques you need to be a mentally healthy and inclusive leader. Each week, you'll hear about a variety of topics linked to mental health, well-being, and diversity that will enhance both your professional practice and personal well-being. Welcome to the 185th episode of the award-winning Diverse Minds podcast. And as you know, it's International Women's Month. And this year's theme is Embrace Equity, as designated by the International Women's Day campaign. And the hashtag Embrace Equity is the campaign theme to get the world talking about why equal opportunities aren't enough and how people start from different places, so true inclusion and belonging require equitable action. So I want to focus on this idea this week around imposter syndrome, confidence versus frustration phenomenon. And it's something that I feel quite strongly about. And actually, if you listened to episode number 82, where I talk about agency as a female solopreneur, I also talk about this, but I'll make reference to the article that I mentioned in that episode as well. But I feel it's really important to explore this because in order to embrace equity, we need to think about this more carefully. But before we carry on with today's show, I just wanted to ask, have you watched my TEDx talk about the connection between culture, race, and mental health? If not, it's something you can watch in your break as it's just 12 minutes long. The link is in the show notes, but I'll also give it to you here. And if it resonates with you, please leave a positive comment on YouTube, share, and like. And that link is bit.ly/TEDx Wolves, WOLVESLO. So that's bit.ly/TEDx Wolves LO. Right. So following on from Women in Tech SEO Festival, Search Engine Optimization, that's what SEO stands for. And if you want to know more about that, do check out last week's episode 184, where I talk more about the experience and the UN's theme for this International Women's Day and month, which is Digit Capital All. And I really wanted to start with this idea around confidence and what we think confidence is. And we can think of it like a meandering stream that we all have to navigate. And confidence comes from the word fidere in Latin, to have trust. And actually, it's about having trust in ourselves, knowing that things will work out somehow. You may speak a number of languages. So think about how this translates not only from English to your other languages you speak, but also how it translates in and of itself if you split the word up in languages that you're thinking of. And then it links to self-esteem. And self-esteem is how we appreciate ourselves, how we value ourselves. And when our self-esteem is high, we feel we can take on challenges. And when it's low, it feels overwhelming. And it's this that ebbs and flows. And often we look at people and we think, oh, they have it all together. I'm never going to be like that. And we've all been there, male or female, non-binary. We compare how we feel inside to how others look on the outside. And in fact, are some people born with confidence? Some people, do they just seem to have it all together? Well, actually, no, I would say it's something that we learn. And it might be that we have more confidence depending on how we were raised, and to have confidence or trust in ourselves or trust that things will work out. Whereas some of us were raised in very anxious households where that wasn't necessarily the case. But we can, of course, give ourselves a little boost on the surface of it. And one of the things I refer to is Amy Cuddy's TED talk around power posing and her research on that. And it's really fascinating talk. If you haven't watched it, I think it's one of the most popular and watched TED talks ever. And her research around how she had an accident and she had an injury, a brain injury, and her quote unquote measured intelligence went down 2 standard deviation points. And that was a really huge thing to have impact on her, because one of the main things, and she talks about this in the TED talk, was that part of her identity was that she was smart. So recovering from this, and also having worked with students, female students in her academic roles, how she saw that young women were questioning their confidence and whether they could do something. So she looked into power posing. So this is an interesting one. And in fact, I went for a job once, and it was in a bank in a sector that I'd never worked in. I did get the job. I had done my research, but I remember thinking, oh my gosh, I just don't know if I can do this, and using those power poses just before the interview. So they do work, and there is evidence behind it. So do check out that talk if you want to know more. But I think we can look at people being confident, but really we need to consider systems when we talk about confidence. And one of the key challenges is patriarchy, because systems can bolster our confidence or deplete it. And I'm not saying that women are helpless. Of course, we can push back against this patriarchal culture in various different ways, but we have to examine who the system favors. And of course, the 9 to 5 is an example of that, where middle to upper class Victorian men, not the ones that worked in factories, might have been working in insurance or banking. And there was this kind of idea that they would leave home and they had a house staff and their wife, and it was a wife then, looking after them. And then they'd go to work. And actually, there's some interesting information about how they would have long pub lunches and, long for what we have now, and then come home at 5 o'clock and get their brandy and their whiskey and their cigar and their slippers by the fire. And that is a slight oversimplification. We know people's lives are more nuanced than that, but generally that's who the 9 to 5 supported. And even in heterosexual relationships where both the man and the woman believe that they share and there's gender equity in the relationship, it's found that women still do 60% of the home labor compared to 40% of the men. So women are still primary carers in the UK for older and younger dependents. And it's incredibly eye-opening for me, and I knew this anyway, which is one of the reasons I am child-free, but how challenging modern motherhood is with childcare, the costs, career management, holding everything and the mental load. So it's the system and not women's ability to really create this support and to think about how do we create systems that mean that people feel confident and in their abilities and to trust themselves, because often what can erode confidence in self is if you don't have keeping in touch days, if you're kept out of the loop, if you feel that you're being micromanaged and you are being micromanaged. This of course impacts on confidence, and it's not a resilience issue. And do check out my episode, a bonus episode, Resilience is Not a Sticking Plaster, where I talk about the fact that it's not that people need to have a stiff upper lip. Now, something that I shared, and I found this brilliant quote from Mindy Kaling, and it says, from her, quote, "I always get asked, where do you get your confidence? I think people are well-meaning, but it's pretty insulting because what it means to me is you, Mindy Kaling, have all the trappings of a very marginalized person. You're not skinny, you're not white, you're a woman. Why on earth would you feel like you're worth anything?" And when I was researching this talk, that really, really struck me. So this idea that, well, we've put barriers in your place. Here you are. You're not meant to feel confident. You're not meant to feel that things are there in your favor. How do you feel so confident? Because we've done really, really well to make sure that you don't feel confident. And I think this is often what happens. We need to think about our confidence in terms of what we have done, what we have achieved, and built on that, realizing that we learn things along the way. So I'm going to ask you 3 questions here, and I want you to think back to an occasion, a time, or a circumstance where you were proud of your achievement. And that could be personally or professionally. That could be in any realm of your life. And then review what it was that you did well, or you felt that you did well. And then what you did that worked well and made a difference. Think about that. And then what could you do to adapt it a little more and make it even better in the future? And often we forget to capture our strengths and do this. Now, on to this thing about imposter syndrome versus frustration phenomenon. So, lots of things here. And in the last couple of weeks, I think in the run up to International Women's Day, there's been a lot of revisiting this. And there was an article on the New Yorker that was sent around my diverse coaching directory WhatsApp group around, everyone feels that they're an imposter. And I'll include the link in the show notes. And this work was carried out by Clance and Immers in 1978, and they actually called it imposter phenomenon. Okay, so it wasn't called imposter syndrome. And I think one of the things that's really difficult is that it really, really pathologizes it. It really makes it sound like it's a mental ill health condition that you might need to take medication for. Now, of course, if someone feels anxious, if someone's experiencing mental ill health, they may feel like, I don't fit in this space. I don't think I can do this. Is that imposter syndrome, or phenomenon? Or is that really the way in which, when we don't feel optimum linked to our self-esteem, we don't feel ready for taking on challenges? And that's understandable. So psychologists Pauline Rose Clance and Susan Immers developed this concept in 1978, as I said, in their founding study. And this founding study focused on high-achieving women from Euro-American backgrounds. And they said, quote, "Despite outstanding academic and professional accomplishments, women who experience the imposter phenomenon persist in believing that they are really not bright and have fooled anyone who thinks otherwise." So we know from this has just created an absolute plethora of information, journals, books, self-help books. And I'm not saying that it shouldn't be there, but it does. I have to say, I feel very, very irritated by a lot of it because it doesn't look at the system. So if we think about ableism, that society is designed for people without any disabilities, visible, invisible, mental health disabilities, physical disabilities, impairments, etc. Of course, someone's going to feel like I don't really belong in this space, because if the T loops aren't working, if it's really loud, if you can't access a building, if there are no alternative ways of accessing something, of course you're going to feel that way. As one example, if everyone in a space is talking about is in a heterosexual relationship and talking about this, of course, if you're with someone from a same-sex relationship, or you define as LGBTQ plus, you're not going to feel particularly safe in that space, or you're not going to feel like this is really where I want to hang out. So it really looks at fixing people rather than fixing places. And it wraps itself up in, you're not confident, right? What can we do? What can we do? And then, of course, there's the brilliant work of Ruchika Tulsian and Jodie Ann Burry in 2021 that was published in the Harvard Business Review, Stop Telling Women They Have Imposter Syndrome. And this is related to global majority Black women of color, as they use the term, how we don't actually experience this in the same way. We know that we can do something, going back to Mindy Kaling's quote, but we just think, how often, and I'm speaking for myself here, I'm saying we, this grand we of millions and billions of people, but many people who have a similar background to me, many women who share a similar background to me, we know we can do it, but we think, how do I jump these hurdles? And I certainly felt that way. I felt furious. I felt, why am I never seen? And that's definitely been a theme throughout my whole life, just not being seen for who I really feel I am, a complete disconnect around how I see myself, how I want to be seen, and how I may be seen by others. And it is okay and normal to have doubts. This is part of the human experience. If we can't bring our true professional self to work, then that is really difficult. And an example that I think particularly in Britain that we can focus on, and if we think about this idea of imposter phenomenon, or really having doubts and feeling you don't fit in, can be around socioeconomic lines. So an example I shared was that if you, for example, never grew up going to five-star hotels for dinner, to stay, etc., and now you work for an organization where you have to go to events or organize events or liaise with five-star hotels, you have to go into the spaces, you might think, oh, I don't belong here, because you've never experienced that kind of environment. Now, that's a very simplistic example of it. We know there are much more nuances to it, but that might erode your confidence. And you might need someone to say, actually, it's okay, it's cool. Like, we need people from different backgrounds, but often it's not spoken about because there's so much shame in it. So how can we start thinking about this differently then? I think it goes back to systems and thinking about how you want to create positive networks for yourself. So if you experience these feelings and think, I shouldn't be here, I'm not good enough, consider what does good enough mean? And something I've really had to learn recently is around this idea of process versus perfection. Now, I am not a perfectionist. I'm very clear about that. My phrase has always been good is good enough, but I am very wrapped up in outcomes. I am very wrapped up in achievements. So I'm kind of like, well, I don't have to be perfect to get there, but I've got to get there. And I've had to learn, and it's really hit me over the last 6 months, is how do you fall in love with the process? And I think that's a real key around how we can think about, dismantle this idea of imposter syndrome and the pathology around it, but also to help jump the barriers of jump or go another direction or walk around them, of what I might call, frustration phenomenon. So if we fall in love with the process and we document our learning and we write down our strengths in the process and remember that we're more than our career. So careers are incredibly important. They are absolutely part of who we are. They're often tapped into our values. People can be very unhappy at work with workplace structures, but also because the job doesn't align with their values. But we need to remember, and I don't know if you've seen this meme on social media, we are dispensable usually at work, particularly if we work in a large organization. We are not dispensable at home, however we define home. So that could be as a housemate, that could be in a nuclear family, that could be, one other significant person. It doesn't matter, however we define that. But we are not. We are completely indispensable in our personal home lives. And so it's really important to remember that when we might feel displaced and discombobulated. It's hard to lean into fear. And I have, as you know, by my desk, if you're a regular listener, that diagram of where the magic happens. First of all, a small circle that says your comfort zone, and then a bigger circle outside that says where the magic happens. Really, it's much easier said than done. But how can we take small and significant steps to moving outside our comfort zone, and also being mindful that we don't have to do it on our own? So what does help look like? What does help feel like? Who do we want to get help from? So seeking professional support is really, really key, and as our micro goals. And that real life is not it's not instant, and it's not Instagram. Things don't happen overnight. We hear about overnight successes, but really they are people who have been trucking away and working really hard, and suddenly their name appears in social media, on social media, or in the newspapers, or on TV, everywhere. But that journey to get there wasn't necessarily instant. These are just some ideas, and also finally how we can help others. So we know that in the 5 ways of well-being, giving back to someone, our time, our words, our attention, and the way we support someone, our time, our attention, it could be through an official volunteering scheme, but that also bolsters how we feel about ourselves and our confidence, our trust in ourselves and our skills, and that things will work out. So I really hope you found this a useful episode, and I've included the resource I've mentioned in the show notes. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave me a positive review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcast from, and you can leave a review. And don't forget, I also do coaching. So if this is something that resonates with you and you want to know more, then please do book a 30-minute free coaching introduction session where you can find out more and see if you want to work with me. So once again, a very happy International Women's Month. And I look forward to you joining me in the next episode, where I'm going to be talking about celebrating International Happiness Day and my journey of doing 100 happy days. Until then, everyone, take care.
Thanks for listening to the Diverse Minds podcast. Don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you access your podcasts from. You can also connect with me on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Tune into next week's episode of the podcast, where I'll bring you more insights on mental health and inclusion. Bye for now.